Lucas was exhausted. The dim glow of his desk lamp was the only light in the small corner office as he squinted at the screen, the flickering cursor mocking him, refusing to move forward. São Paulo's hectic streets felt like they were miles away, a world Lucas couldn't connect with anymore. His phone vibrated again, but instead of checking it, he simply let it ring, another reminder of how much he had to do. The emails piled up in his inbox, each one tugging at his attention, and yet none of it seemed to be making any difference. Every day felt like a race he was losing. No matter how hard he worked, time seemed to slip through his fingers, and the more he tried to keep up, the more overwhelmed he became. The office was silent except for the clatter of keys on the keyboard, but the hum of discontent filled the air. He couldn't remember the last time he felt truly in control of his day. Was it last month? Last week? It felt like a lifetime ago. The deadlines were endless, his to-do list growing with every passing hour. And the more he worked, the further away his goal seemed. The pressure, the constant buzz of expectations from both his boss and colleagues, it was a weight he carried alone. His personal life had almost vanished into the background. He hadn't seen his friends in weeks. The only thing left was work, and yet it felt like he was barely making any progress. Lucas had tried everything. He downloaded productivity apps, set timers, worked longer hours, and even attempted to tackle tasks with urgency, but nothing seemed to stick. He was stuck in a never-ending cycle of getting things done without feeling accomplished. There has to be a way out, he thought, staring at his cluttered desk. He glanced at the clock again. It was already late, and he was still nowhere near done. It was on a dreary morning like this that he met someone who would change everything. As he sipped his coffee and gazed out the window, a familiar face appeared in the hallway, Gustavo, an old friend from university. Gustavo had always been one of those calm individuals, never in a rush, always smiling, always present. He looked like someone who had mastered time itself. Lucas barely recognized him at first. His once disheveled appearance had transformed into one of purpose and clarity. They exchanged pleasantries, but Lucas couldn't hold back. "Gustavo, how do you do it? How do you manage everything without losing your mind? I can't seem to keep up." Gustavo smiled, his calm demeanor unshaken. "It's not about doing more, Lucas. It's about doing less, but better. Let me show you a secret." "What do you mean by doing less?" Lucas asked, his curiosity piqued. Gustavo sat down, pulling out his phone, and began explaining something Lucas had never heard of: time blocking. "It's simple," Gustavo said. "Instead of running around from task to task, you dedicate specific time slots to specific activities. You block off uninterrupted chunks of time for important work and stick to it. No distractions. It's about working with intent, not against the clock." Lucas was skeptical at first, but Gustavo's words lingered in his mind. Could it really be that simple? He didn't have the luxury of just cutting back on work. His responsibilities were real, his deadlines were tight, and his job required constant attention. But there was something about Gustavo's calm confidence that made Lucas think twice. What if the problem wasn't his workload, but the way he was managing it? The more Lucas thought about it, the more the idea of focusing on a single task at a time felt right. The constant multitasking, the switching between emails, meetings, and reports, it was draining him. And yet none of it seemed to get done faster or better. Determined to give it a shot, Lucas spent the next few days studying time-blocking methods. He read articles, watched YouTube videos, and even purchased a few books on productivity. One common theme emerged. The key wasn't about cramming as much as possible into a day, but about protecting time for deep work. Lucas didn't need more hours. He needed to use the hours he had more wisely. The concept was surprisingly simple. Designate time for every task, from meetings to creative work, and eliminate distractions during those periods. He set his first experiment: no emails during deep work hours, no phone distractions, and certainly no multitasking. He was going to test this and see if it could truly change his life. Monday morning came, and Lucas decided to give time blocking a real shot. He'd been skeptical, but now, after days of preparation, he was ready. His first time block was set for the most important task of the day, writing a proposal that had been lingering on his to-do list for over a week. For the next 2 hours, he would dedicate himself entirely to that one task. No emails, no calls, no distractions. Just him, the proposal, and his undivided attention. The first half hour was rough. His mind kept wandering, and he was tempted to check his phone for any urgent messages. But remembering Gustavo's advice, he turned off his notifications and kept pushing forward. Slowly but surely, something started to happen. Ideas began to flow more freely, and his fingers moved faster across the keyboard. The constant pressure he usually felt to check emails, text messages, or notifications disappeared. It was as if the weight had been lifted, and he was free to work without interruptions. The sense of accomplishment Lucas felt by the end of the 2 hours was like nothing he had experienced in months. Normally, a task like that would have felt like a drag, stretched out over an entire day with constant distractions. But now it felt like time had expanded in his favor. He had done in 2 hours what would have taken him an entire day of fragmented work. More than the productivity, it was the clarity he gained from uninterrupted focus that amazed him. The weight in his chest, the anxiety that had lingered for so long, started to melt away. For the first time in a while, Lucas felt like he was truly in control of his time and in control of his life. But it wasn't just the work that had changed. After completing the task, Lucas found himself more energized. His mind wasn't scattered, and the rest of the day seemed to flow more smoothly. He moved from one block of time to another with a sense of purpose, each task feeling more achievable. By lunchtime, he was already ahead of schedule. For the first time, Lucas could actually take a break without guilt. He realized that the key wasn't just getting more work done, it was about getting the right work done at the right time. The next few days proved to be even more transformative. Lucas had set aside blocks for everything, from meetings to personal time and even relaxation. At first it felt odd, almost too structured, like he was imposing a rigid schedule on himself. But the more he stuck to it, the more natural it became. Soon, it wasn't just about work. Lucas found himself creating time blocks for hobbies, self-care, and even social activities. He realized that the more intentional he became with his time, the more he could enjoy every aspect of his life, without guilt or anxiety over unfinished work. He had scheduled time in the evenings for dinner with his family, a walk in the park, or a phone call with his best friend. These blocks were just as important as his work hours, and he treated them with the same level of respect. He had stopped believing that time spent away from his desk was wasted. Now, he understood that time off allowed him to recharge, come back to work with a clear mind, and be more productive when he returned. It was all about balance. As he looked at his calendar, filled with scheduled moments for both work and rest, Lucas began to appreciate how much control he had over his own life. But it wasn't just the structure that was changing Lucas, it was his mindset. He started to see work as an opportunity to focus and create, rather than a never-ending task list to get through. Time blocking had done something more than organize his day. It had allowed him to shift his focus from urgency to intention. Each task now felt purposeful, and each moment of leisure was no longer tainted by the thought of pending work. Lucas also found that his mental health improved dramatically. The constant anxiety, the nagging feeling that he was never doing enough, began to dissipate. He no longer felt like he was drowning in tasks or that time was slipping away from him. He had created a new rhythm for his life, one that didn't require constant hustle, but instead thoughtful intention and careful planning. Time blocking didn't just give him control over his day, it gave him control over his life. As the weeks went by, Lucas reflected on how much his life had transformed. Not just his productivity, but his sense of peace. His relationships had improved, his stress had decreased, and his overall happiness had skyrocketed. Time was no longer an enemy, it was an ally. Lucas was finally able to balance work and personal life without feeling torn between the two. He had learned that real success didn't come from working harder or longer, but from being strategic with your time. Looking out over São Paulo, Lucas felt a sense of accomplishment and gratitude. It wasn't just about finishing tasks.